Welcome to lesson 03. Today we're going to be talking about factoring polynomials. First thing we're going to do is we're going to factor using the distributive property, and how we're going to do that is we're going to take out the greatest common factor. So we're going to take each term and we're going to see what we can factor out of all of them. Okay, so for this first example, I've got 4a squared plus 8. You'll notice that in the numbers 4 and 8 I can factor out a 4. For the variables, I've got a squared and a. I can factor out an a. So when I factor something out, I divide each term by what I factored out. So 4a squared divided by 4a. 4 divided by 4 is 1. A squared divided by a is a. Same thing for the second term. 8a divided by 4a. 8 divided by 4 is 2. A divided by a cancel each other out. So I've got 4a times the quantity 1a plus 2. And to rewrite it, I don't need that 1 in front of the a, so I can just say 4a times a plus 2. And that is my final answer. The next type of factoring we're going to do is we're going to use what's called factors and sums. We're going to start in this form right here. Okay, so we've got ax squared plus bx plus c. Notice how there's no number in front of the x squared, there's just a 1. So what we do here is only applicable to these types of problems where we don't have a number in front of the x squared. So to factor it, we're going to have our two binomials here. Since each equation starts with x squared, the first part is always going to start with x. Now to fill out the rest of the parentheses, we need two numbers that will multiply together to get our c value and add up to b. So in this first case, we need two numbers that multiply together to get 6 and add up to 5. Those two numbers are 2 and 3. Positive 2 times positive 3 gives me 6. Positive 2 plus 3 will give me 5. Here is my factor. The same thing on the next one. You'll notice we start with an x squared. So when I've got my two parentheses, both of them are going to start with x. So now I need two numbers that multiply together to get a positive 12, add up to a negative 8. Okay, so to get 12 and add up to 8, I'm going to need 6 and 2. And in order for it to be a negative 8, both 6 and 2 are going to have to be negative, because negative 6 times negative 2 will get me my positive 12, and negative 6 plus negative 2 gives me my negative 8. So here are my factors for that. The last one, we've got x squared plus 14x minus 15. Go ahead and pause the video, try to factor this out, and once you've got an answer, go ahead and hit play and see how you did. Okay, as you can see, since we started with x squared, I start my two parentheses with x and x. Now to fill out the rest of it, they needed to multiply together to get negative 15 and add up to a positive 14. When these two numbers are 1 away from each other, it's always going to be c and 1. So 15 and 1. Now to get a positive 14, I'd have to have a positive 15 and a minus 1. And it checks out because 15 times negative 1 is negative 15. 15 plus a negative 1 is 14. So this is going to be my factor. Now we're going to do this when we don't have a 1 in front of the x squared. So now we've got a number in front, this a. Okay, so for our first example here, we've got 6x squared plus 7x minus 3. Now there's a few different ways that we can do this. The one I'm going to show you is the one that I've used in the past. If that one doesn't quite work, we can always talk about more in class together. The way I've always done it is I use a few different steps. First of all, I always take my first term times my last term. So 6x times a negative 3 is going to give me negative 18x squared. Next, I take that product that I just got, that negative 18x squared, and I want to break it down into two factors. Okay? So I'm going to be adding these two factors up, and they should give me my middle term of 7x. So I need two numbers that multiply together to get a negative 18 and add up to 7. And that's going to be 9 and negative 2. And each one is going to have an x with it. So what I'm going to do next in step 3 is instead of this 7x, I'm going to put the two factors that I just found. So 6x squared plus 9x plus a negative 2x minus 3. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor using what's called grouping. So I'm going to group the first two together and group the second two together. In each parenthesis, I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. So if you look here, 6x squared and 9x, I can take out a 3 and an x, and I'm left with 2x plus 3. In the second one, I've got negative 2x minus 3. 2x and 3 don't share anything in common, so I can't factor anything out there. And I only have an x with the first term. I don't have one with the second, so I can't factor an x out either. But what I can do is I can factor out a negative. And when I factor out a negative, I factor out a negative 1. And what's left? 2x plus 3. Now what you should notice here, and what should happen every time, is in your parentheses you have the same terms, the 2x plus 3. That is going to be one of your factors. The second factor is going to be what's outside of your two parentheses. I've got a 3x and a minus 1. So my two factors of 6x squared plus 7x minus 3 are going to be 2x plus 3 and 3x minus 1. Before we get to the last part of factoring, we need to talk about some special products. So what happens when we do the product of something like squared, or when they're very similar? Okay, so the first thing is, in red here, we've got a plus b squared. So we're taking a binomial and we're squaring it. When you square something, you take it times itself. So instead of a plus b squared, I can write that as a plus b times a plus b. When that happens, the product is going to be a squared plus 2 times ab plus b squared. Similarly, if I have a minus b squared, I can rewrite that as a minus b times a minus b. And when I factor that out, or FOIL that out, I'm going to get a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. These are called perfect square trinomials. And we can use those when we're given polynomials like this, and we notice that they're perfect squares. We can factor them into the a plus b squared or a minus b squared. The other special product is if we have a plus b times a minus b. So we've got the same value to start the parentheses, the same value to end it. The only difference is one's got a plus and one's got a minus. Our product is going to be a squared minus b squared. Okay, and that we call difference of squares. And again, how we're going to use that, if we see this as our polynomial that we have to factor, and we notice that it's a square minus another square, we'll be able to factor it into something like this. Okay, so now we're going to use these special products to factor special polynomials. Okay, so first of all, you'll notice that this first example, 4x squared plus 20x plus 25, has 3 terms in it. Okay, so you'll notice that we're probably going to be using one of these two special products. Okay, we can't really use the difference of squares on the right because that one only has 2 terms in it. Okay, so what we need to look for is we need to look for this a squared over here and the b squared. Okay, that if we can see that, that's the first sign that we might have a special product. So if this term is a square and this term is a square, we might have something. So what can I square to get 4x squared? Well, I can square 2x. What can I square to get 25? Well, I can square 5. The main part here is now the middle. If I take 2 times those 2 things that I squared and I get the middle term, then I know I have a special product. 2 times 2x times 5 does in fact give me 20x. So this is a special polynomial. It's a perfect square trinomial. You'll notice how it's 2 plus signs, which is just like this top one here. So if I have a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, I can factor that into a plus b squared. Here is my factored form. I look at the second example, a squared minus, or x squared minus 4. You'll notice I only have two terms here. Well, that's telling me to look at the difference of squares. Again, I look for, can I square something to get the first term? Can I square something to get the second one? To get x squared, I would square x. To square 4, I would square 2. So now since I know what I would square to get each one, I can fill in a and b. So my two factors are going to be a plus b times a minus b. And here's my factored form for x squared minus 4. Go ahead and give these last two a try first. So pause the video, write these down, get an answer, and then go ahead and hit play and see how you did. Alright, so here we go. For this first one, if you remember all the way back in the beginning, the first thing we always do is make sure there's nothing we can take out of both. If you'll notice here, I've got 4x squared and 16. I can take a 4 out of both of those. So I need to do that. And that's what this is right here. What I'm left with is x squared minus 4. I still have a difference of squares here because I can square x to get x squared and I can square 2 to get 4. So that 4 comes down to the bottom, and then my difference of squares gives me a plus b times a minus b. Here are my factors. For the second one, 9x squared minus 24x plus 16. I know 9x squared is a square because I can square 3x. I know 16 is a square because I can square 4. I have to check this middle one. 2 times 3x times 4 does in fact get me 24x. So since I checked all that, I know I can do it as a special factor. And since this is a minus sign, I'm going to have a minus in my factor. I should have 3x minus 4 squared.